wanted to read briefly from The Religious Roots of the First Amendment by Nicholas P. Miller, with like a small part of it. Only because like I was talking to these like other Christians, and I don't know, thinks that I was being ridiculous because they're talking about like the Christian Prince and all that, and I was like, yeah, the Christian Prince could be potentially like a man of sin or something, like someone that's not godly or could appear to be godly. I just thought I was just thought I was just being ridiculous or something, but it's not true. I'm just saying because I was like reading it from this book right here, right? Like some of the things that it was saying about that idea or so. It's a good book, goes over also like some other forms of church and state, like these few models or something. Like it goes over in this chapter. It goes over the Samuel Pufendorf medieval model and Puritan New England. Then there's another model of John Locke, dissenting Protestant and constitutional period. And then there's the Pierre Bayle skeptical model, 20th century America. It's like a diagram. Looks like that. It has truth and God at the top on these two. And over here on the Bayle model is like secular, and the I is the individual. Like over here, church and state, I guess, is above an individual, right? The I. So I guess church and state is more important over the individual. Like truth and God is the most important, then church and state, then individual. The Locke model, it's truth and God at the top, individual as important over church and state. And over here it's secular. In the Bayle model, it's secular, and that is at the top, I guess. And then the individual, and then church and state at the bottom, right? Let me just read briefly on what it describes. Would be a good place to start, I guess. Yeah, down here, the reviews in American history. My discussion of the third view has moved beyond what Bayle himself would have suggested into how at least parts of modern liberalism has developed this view. All three of these views, the Pufendorfian, the Lockean, and the Baylean models, have had varying influences throughout American history. A good case has been made by political scientist Philip Munoz that all three views were present at the constitutional founding period in the persons of George Washington, James Madison, and Thomas Jefferson. It gives you a side-by-side comparison of these models. A representative advocate the historical periods they represent and their time of great influence in America is represented in figure E4, which is, this one, comparison of the three models, the ones I showed you. Since the American Puritans developed a Pufendorian-like church and state arrangement in early New England, with a civil magistrate involved in enforcing ecclesiastical rules and discipline. Thus, the earliest American colonies were founded on the theory of the medieval model on the left in figure E4, with the exception of Rhode Island. Some later ones, especially New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and North Carolina, were founded basically on the Protestant theory in the center box, which also guided the formation of the national constitution. And despite Pufendorf's enormous influence in both Scotland and the American colonies, the founders of the American Republic explicitly rejected its form of church and state arrangement at the time of the Revolution, and the formation of the Constitution. Pufendorf's model of toleration was limited to 2 or 3 New England states, and within a few years vanished from even there. And it was Locke's formulation, mediated by Madison, Witherspoon, and other key American thinkers of dissenting Protestantism, that carried the day in the founding of the American Republic. Their views of the separate roles of the two powers were the ideological victors on the topic of tolerance and religious freedom in the early republic. It is a shift from a medieval paternalistic hierarchical model to an individualistic, egalitarian, rights-based outlook that Gordon Wood so aptly documents in his justly famed work, The Radicalism of the American Revolution. Wood broadly and convincingly documents the change from hierarchy, patriarchy, aristocracy, and patronage to democracy, equality, and republicanism, and the rule of law in colonial America. Figure 4 can perhaps shed light on one of the puzzles in Wood's book. In his subtitle, he asserts that the book shows, quote, how a revolution transformed a monarchical society into a democratic one, unlike any other that had ever existed, end quote. While he is right about the uniqueness of American society, it seems apparent from the story in his book that the revolution did not cause the shift from a monarchical to a republican ethos. Rather, the revolution was a symptom of a shift that had already occurred in American culture and society. Wood does an excellent job of describing that shift from monarchical to republican outlook, but offers, in my view, a less than convincing arguments for the reasons or causes of the shift. He focuses on the Enlightenment, arguing that, quote, for the revolutionary generation of America became the Enlightenment fulfilled, end quote. This raises the problem earlier discussed of trying to explain a movement with tremendous popular involvement and appeal to an elite affinity and state of mind. Wood is unwilling to give religious thought any real credit for the paradigm shift to a Republican outlook. Instead, is crediting Enlightenment and rationalistic sources. Indeed, he views religion as a conservative force that largely resisted that shift. But it seems that Wood is looking at only one version of religion and telling this story, that of magisterial Protestantism. This is most obviously displayed when he describes the belief in, quote, liberty of conscience and separation of church and state, end quote, as an, quote, Enlightenment belief, end quote, that was resisted by, quote, many religious groups, end quote. Indeed, there were religious groups that opposed religious liberty and separation of church and state, but the dominant religious groups in early Republican America had taken on a dissenting Protestant perspective, which Wood seems to miss almost completely. Wood's larger story becomes much more applicable when religion and religious belief are given their due weight in shifting popular views forward from a medieval to a Protestant outlook on church and society and the individual. Let me see. I just wanted to read to describe the differences of those models, but what I was trying to really go to, some of the examples I gave of the Christian Prince, right? Because the idea is supposed to be like self-governance, right? But I don't know, the Christian Prince is sort of like, the idea of the Christian Prince kind of reminds me of like some of the fears of the colonists, right? Like having an established Anglican bishop or something. I guess that person would have control over like the Christian communities or something. Like kind of like what you want, right? Enforcing discipline and stuff like that. Or and all I was saying is that like just because the guy is Christian doesn't mean, or that he wears the title of the Christian Prince, that he's somehow going to be a godly man. I mean, it's obviously a risk that it almost like not be a godly man. I mean, it's kind of like what I see certain Catholics say about like the Pope or something, some of the ones that don't like him. And so that's all I'm saying. I mean, that's just the angle I'm coming at it from. Like, it doesn't matter if he's called the Christian Prince or something. It doesn't prove that this man is godly. And obviously, it's just one form of, I don't know, what is it called, Christian order, or civil order, or whatever. A theory on church and state. Like here, he says, rather than the citizens monitoring a government accountable to them, as Locke envisioned, American citizens are becoming increasingly content to let the government monitor itself and them. Unwittingly, they have adopted an attitude towards government that is more consistent with Pufendorf's view, that of the paternal state which can be trusted to look out for our best interests. In Pufendorf's model, a paternalistic view of government power also accepts a role for government in religious matters. It comes as no surprise then that the recent moves towards a diminishment of the separation of powers and an increase in centralized authority has been accompanied by an increase in the state's involvement with religion. And, under the sovereign and religion, it talks about like President George Bush, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama. This book was written in, I forget what book it was written in. Probably written during like Obama's presidency, maybe. I don't know. Like here it says, in his treatise on church and state, Pufendorf made a list of appropriate involvements of the, quote, Christian prince, end quote, with the church. It is interesting to compare his list with actual events from the last few years. He's talking about here, he gives like about 6 events. Like the first one says, the sovereign funds Christian organizations. It talks about how Presidents Clinton, Bush, and Obama have sponsored legislation or policies to send tax monies to religious groups and churches to carry out social welfare programs. In practice, the vast majority of this money goes to Christian groups. The Bush administration also supported school voucher programs aimed at supporting private religious schools. And the second one, the sovereign provides oversight and surveillance of religious groups. The Department of Justice has implemented rules that allow it to monitor and infiltrate religious groups based on suspicions of illegal activity, suspicions that do not need to meet the traditional law enforcement standards of probable cause. And the third one is the sovereign sets standards for teachers in religious schools. When schools accept state voucher funds, they generally are required to admit students and even employees, teachers, regardless of religious affiliation of practices. This can also be true for employees of religious organizations whose salaries are paid out of government money given for faith-based social programs. And for the sovereign uses religion for civil unity. While most presidents have employed religious language in their speeches, President George Bush administration took this practice to new levels of pervasiveness involving faith and belief in God on a wide range of personal, domestic, and foreign policy matters. While ostensibly acknowledging America's religious diversity, he treated explicitly Christian language and symbols as a kind of unifying theme in his public communications. Leaders of both parties have participated in this trend, and neither wants to be left out in the race to gain the support of religious America. The 2012 presidential race has taken this use of religious language to new heights, as one Republican candidate after another finds it important to cast himself or herself as the true evangelical candidate who will oppose the media's, quote, war on religion, end quote. The Mormon candidates in the field have to go to extra lengths to assert that their religious views are acceptably Christian and American. Indeed, in his 2008 candidacy, Mitt Romney felt it necessary to publicly declare that he believed that, quote, that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and the Savior of mankind, end quote. And 5, the sovereign creates church standards and oversees discipline. Just prior to the 2004 American presidential campaign, the media reported efforts by the Bush campaign to influence the Catholic hierarchy in Rome to encourage American bishops to enforce conservative Catholic social teachings. On topics such as gay marriage and abortion, these topics were an important point of contention between President Bush and his challenger, John Kerry, a Catholic, in that presidential race. And 6, the sovereign promotes consensus religious beliefs and opposes atheists. Attempts by secularists to remove, quote, under God, end quote, from the Pledge of Allegiance or the Ten Commandments from public spaces has resulted in a backlash against the beliefs of atheists and unbelievers. A sitting Supreme Court justice not long ago wrote that because the, quote, vast majority, end quote, of believers, Christians, Jews, and Islamic believed in God and the validity of the Ten Commandments, there was nothing, quote, unconstitutional in the states favoring religion generally, honoring God through public prayer and acknowledgement, or in a non-proselytizing manner, venerating the Ten Commandments, end quote. Some of the above items, especially the careful use of some religious language by civil leaders, are perhaps an appropriate corrective to the last half-century of increasing secularization of the public sphere. We have recently passed through a period where a kind of secular orthodoxy reigned in the public sphere, and many religious people felt marginalized. The Lockean Protestant model does not view all public mentions of God as violative of a healthy separation of church and state. Both Madison and Jefferson, who were both very sensitive to issues of church and state separation, still use language referencing a creator God in their works of public advocacy and policy. The most obvious example, this is Jefferson's reference in the Declaration of Independence to all men being, quote, endowed by their creator, end quote, with rights. Madison's memorial and remonstrance likewise invokes the notion of a creator God to whom humanity owed certain duties. It says, but their God was the God of natural theology and philosophy. He was the God accessible by all, according to Locke's philosophy, through the application of reason in the natural world. For them, religion was not the same thing as acknowledgement of God's existence. His role as a creator, or even the humans, should relate to him. These truths, they believed, could be arrived by a natural philosophy. Religion, on the other hand, is in a definition used by James Madison and George Mason in framing the Virginia Constitution was, quote, the duty which we owe to our Creator and manner discharging it, end quote. In this view, religion was not just a mere conception of a supreme being. Rather, it was those specifically revealed ideas, either through holy books, prophets, or even an inner light, about how people should worship and behave towards him. And so, let's see. He goes on to talk about like America caught between extremes. Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. The list that he was going over on the seven, right? So it's like these men that you typically would associate with godly men, right? Like the Bushes, the Clintons, and Obamas, right? But they still fill this role of the Christian prince, and so that's what I'm saying. It's like my only point was that that they are able to fulfill that, but still not according to you be godly men. I mean, is that something that you're okay with, right? So that's all I was saying, like about the book. I do recommend the book, though, if you want to learn more about what it says. But that's all I wanted to say about the book. So I don't know, to me it wasn't like, what I said was that potentially like, that you're Christian prince, right? Like maybe he tells you what you want to hear, but he may himself not be a godly man, you know? Be a double-minded man kind of thing is what I'm just saying. So I don't know, is it far, like, my being ridiculous, right? Like those other Christians are saying about what saying to me, about what I said about how your Christian prince could be a potential man of sin, and he has some control over all these like Christian communities. I guess that's what you want this Christian prince to have, whatever that's supposed to be. And yeah, I did get some other books though. This one is Who's Afraid of Christian Nationalism by Mark David Hall. And it just says why Christian nationalism is not an existential threat to America or the church. It says American Christian nationalism exists and is problematic, but contrary to its many critics, it does not pose an essential threat to American democracy or the Christian church. Haven't read it yet, but I'll probably read it later. Another one. This book's by William J. Federer, called Silence Equals Consent with Sin of Omission. Looks like this. It deals with politics and Christianity. It says, what will happen next? How have godly people been persuaded to let ungodliness reign? It talks about President Eisenhower, 1954, quote, this relationship between a spiritual faith and our form of government is obvious. That man is endowed by his creator, born in the image of God, end quote. How were America's founders inspired by ancient Israel's, quote, covenant, end quote, government? Who came up with the idea that politics were worldly and, quote, holy, end quote, people should withdraw? If the, quote, holy, end quote, withdraw, who is left in charge? And then who began calling Christian patriots, quote, Christian nationalists, end quote. Do globalists hate nationalists? Quotes George Soros, quotes Klaus Schwab, and quotes Billy Graham, then Ben Franklin. So, I haven't read this one either because I got it the other day. This one I got yesterday as well. It's called The Founding Fathers, What Did They Really Say? By Matt Clark. Evidence that the U.S. was founded on God and Christian principles. It's a pretty white book like this. It just goes over all the stuff that they said. Read the presidential proclamations and governor issued proclamations that were issued calling upon the citizens of the United States to set aside a day of prayer for Thanksgiving and ask God for his guidance and forgiveness. Many more historical documents aside. Founding Fathers, what did they really say? Evidence that the U.S. was founded on God and Christian principles is a must-have book for your personal library. So, the book, I haven't read this one either yet, but the book I'm still reading is this one. Property and the Pursuit of Happiness, Locke, the Declaration of Independence, Madison, and the Challenge of the Administrative State. This is by Edward J. Erler. So far it's pretty good. It deals with like problems of the way Locke is interpreted, and critiques those positions. And then it goes over basically his Christian religion. And like on this chapter, I guess I read briefly. Like I was on this part in the chapter of Property and the Pursuit of Happiness. Just read briefly from it, kind of see what some of the stuff is about. It says the moral and political resolution of the theological political predicament. This agreement is perhaps most succinctly expressed by a statement in an essay concerning human understanding that we have already had occasion to quote in part. Quote, reason is natural revelation, whereby the eternal Father of light and fountain of all knowledge communicates to mankind that portion of truth which he has laid within the reach of their natural faculties, end quote. By the same token, Locke says, quote, revelation is natural reason, enlarged by a set of discoveries communicated by God immediately, which reason vouches the truth of, by the testimony and proofs it gives that they come from God, so that he that takes away reason to make way for revelation puts out the light of both, end quote. He gives a source of where Locke says this. And on this account, revelation cannot be known without reason, and reason would not exist without revelation. Revelation is known to reason in the form of self-evident truths, which seems to be the origin of all knowledge. It is reason, not faith or tradition, that judges the truth of revelation, notwithstanding the fact that there are, quote, many things, end quote, beyond the discovery of our natural faculties and above reason, end quote, that are, quote, when revealed, the proper matter of faith, end quote. For example, quote, that the dead shall rise and live again, end quote, is, quote, beyond the discovery of reason, end quote, and is purely a matter of faith, he gives a source here. Just can't read it. It's like I'm just having a hard time reading it. But anyway, but within the proper sphere of reason's domain, accepting something that contradicts reason as God's revelation, Locke avers, would, quote, wholly destroy the most excellent part of his workmanship, our understanding, end quote. Quote, if anything shall be thought revelation, end quote, Locke assures us, quote, which is contrary to the plain principles of reason and the evident knowledge the mind has of its own clear and distinct ideas, their reason must be hearkened to as to a matter within its province, end quote. Whether God has revealed it, certainly true, since God, quote, cannot err and will not deceive, end quote. No doubt can be made of God's revelation, since both knowledge and faith are dependent on his revelations. But the question is whether something is a divine revelation, and here, quote, reason must judge, end quote. And the reasonableness of Christianity. Locke notes that the heathen philosophers had been unable to articulate from undeniable principles, quote, ethics in a science like mathematics in every part demonstrable, end quote. Locke quickly notes that such an ethics would have been ineffective in any case, since the, quote, greatest part of mankind, end quote, lacked the leisure and capacity to follow the required demonstrations. Locke, however, remarks in an essay concerning human understanding, quote, I am bold to think that morality is capable of demonstration as well as mathematics, since the precise real essence of these things moral words stand for may be perfectly known, and so the congruity of or incongruity of the things themselves be certainly discovered, in which consists perfect knowledge, end quote. For Locke, ideas abstracted from sense experience are not intrinsic to the matter and motion experienced by the senses, but are purely a creation of the understanding. The, quote, nominal essences, end quote, are abstract definitions necessary to organize sense experiences. The, quote, nominal essences, end quote, are not expressions of objective reality, but mental constructs, created species, as it were, to facilitate understanding in a universe of matter and motion that would otherwise be incomprehensible. These mental constructs are therefore arbitrary impositions, but once adequate definitions have been settled, the mind can proceed to logical conclusions that yield mathematical certainty. Mathematics is concerned with abstract ideas that are extrapolations from sense perception, and it deals only with relations among ideas wholly independent of reality. Thus, mathematics can be a precise discipline yielding precise knowledge. Locke calculates that moral reasoning can produce the same results because it can be made to deal exclusively with relations among abstract ideas divorced from reality in the same way that mathematics does. The nominal essences, as mere mental compositions, can be manipulated as logical constructs as precisely as mathematical proofs. He just talks about morality, of course, belongs to the category that Locke calls, quote, mixed modes, end quote, since sense perception yields simple ideas, quote, those ideas we have of yellow, white, heat, cold, soft, hard, bitter, sweet, and all those which we call sensible qualities which the senses convey into the mind from the external objects, end quote. Since the simple ideas can be combined by active operations of the mind into complex ideas, quote, as simple ideas are observed to exist in several combinations united together, so that the mind has a power to consider several of them united together as one idea, and that not only as they are united in external objects, but as itself has joined them, end quote. And just goes on talking about these ideas and stuff. And here it says that Locke certainly implies that a complete moral code can be based on this demonstrative method. Talks about the reasonableness of Christianity. The New Testament supplied a complete and adequate code of morality that was confirmed by reason, and detailing how reason reaches mathematical certainty regarding moral issues. Locke is demonstrating how reason confirms revelation. Every self-evident truth and every intuitive knowledge is tantamount to a revelation. And this provides the point of departure in the chain of reasoning that leads to moral truth and moral certainty. We saw earlier that Locke describes the law of nature in two treatises of government as both reason and the voice of God. He gives you numerous sources in the two treatises of government where he cites them. It says that the voice of God is translated or communicated to reason through demonstration. The laws of nature are the product of this reasoning and provide the metes and bounds of moral truth and can properly be denominated the, quote, laws of nature and nature's God, end quote. He talks about the two of the examples that Locke gives, demonstrating the mathematical certainty of moral propositions or particular interest, saying, where there is no property, there is no injustice, is a proposition as certain as any demonstration in Euclid. For the idea of property being a right to anything, and the idea to which the name injustice is given being the invasion or violation of that right, it is evident that these ideas being thus established and these names annexed to them, I can as certainly know this proposition to be true as that a triangle has three angles equal to two right ones. And he talks about the second example. We recognize in reading the second treatise, closely connected, quote, no government allows absolute liberty. The idea of government being the establishment of society upon certain rules or laws which require conformity to them, and the idea of absolute liberty being for anyone to do whatsoever he pleases. I am as capable of being certain of the truth of this proposition as of any in mathematics, end quote. It is a simple matter of comparing the congruence or incongruence of two ideas, property and justice. If there is no property, there can be no justice. Similarly, the two ideas of government and absolute liberty are compared. Government means conformity to rules and law. That is clearly incongruent with absolute liberty. There's no government allows absolute liberty, as we expected. These moral proofs are highly abstract, but as Locke asserts, it is impossible, given the definitions, to deny the train of reasoning that leads to an irrefutable conclusion. The idea of property is clearly inseparable from the idea of justice, a theme that Locke makes central in the second treatise. As he does the relation of government to a proper understanding of the rule of law and liberty. The rule of law depends on a proper understanding of the distinction between liberty and license. Locke's examples remind us of the, quote, maxim in ethics and politics, end quote, that Hamilton said were of, quote, the same nature, end quote. As self-evident truth discussed in Chapter 2, Hamilton did not claim mathematical certainty for his maxims, but he did claim that the self-evident character of the maxims he adduced, for example, that the, quote, means ought to be proportioned to the end, end quote, compelled assent. In any case, the right to property and the rule of law both necessary conclusions from the self-evident truth that all men are created equal, or certain principles for the American founders. And the next chapter is just talking about Locke and Madison on property. I'm enjoying the book, still not quite finished with it. I don't know, to me it's like, compared to all the other books, what to say about the presuppositions of Locke's religion being Christian, and even classifying it as a form of Protestant religion. That's what I'm saying at the Declaration. That's what I'm saying. It can be seen as like, even if they were all Lockean liberals, then they were Christian liberals in that sense, right? So it's possible to say that if they were united in that form of liberalism, then they basically, you could say they were like united in a form of Protestant religion. That's what the Declaration reflects, this kind of religion, I mean, at least that would be one way to to fight off the illiberal infection, right? Which to me is the distortions on his liberalism and Christian religion, right? Because certain Christians are against liberal order or so, but to me they're two sides of the same coin, like the liberal faith and the Christian faith. the American founding, the American consciousness seems like it comes from one man, right? So they have the same starting point, the same source. And so it's not the case that you have to side with a non-Christian liberal. That no, it can remain Christian and it is liberal enough in so much that it remains Christian, right? Because to a Christian, it's more important, godly order is more important than liberalism. So in the end, it's not, um, you know, it's not liberalism itself, right? We don't exist for liberalism. We exist for godly order, things like that. And I just believe that liberal values provide this godly order, and it just requires us to interpret God in a different sense, right? In the American context, obviously, I mean, if he established the American order, right, especially the republic and stuff, then you have to understand it like the way, I don't know, I guess the way Lincoln used biblical scripture and American scripture to combat the idea of slavery from American Confederate theocrats, right? So it's necessary to progress in a certain light in the context of how America is Christian. Obviously, how is it Christian? It's Christian in its liberalism and its dissenting tradition, because it has, like to me, American faith is basically Christian, dissenting, liberal, covenantal, patriotic, right? That is basically all these faiths combined. Is to me makes up the American faith. And so it's just my thought, you know. Like I don't believe I should have to advocate for like reinventing the wheel of religious order in this country. I mean, to me, it is a religious order. That's why to me it's like not mentioning the deity in the Constitution or Declaration is not until its absence. Like it could presuppose the deity without mentioning the name, right? Like I could say that maybe as Christian people, the reason why it's good that we're not a theocracy is that we don't take the name of the Lord, right? So it's about keeping his name holy, and so I think that a republic is sufficient, and to the republic for which it stands, right? It's sufficient for the gospel and your liberty. And so to me, I would rather bind the American consciousness to the Republican form of government and constitution and all that, bind it to the biblical consciousness, but in the American context. And so that's why I try, like in my previous videos, on trying to provide a Christian frame on the country, right? Like a consciousness that you can feed into on how it is Christian, and how it's liberal, instead of believing in these ideas, instead of believing these ideas that America has no God and that America's God can be anyone's God, right? Which is absurd. It goes arguing with these other secularists and that I forgot everything that was said, but basically that I believe that the Declaration, the God of the Declaration, the same God of the Bible, because the same God of Locke. It's just interpreted through the liberal lenses a little bit, you know. But that's for the sake of godly order. It's not for the sake of liberalism. And that these even your most theistic founders, like the ones that you call theists, like Benjamin Franklin and James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, right? To me, they saw themselves as like Christian people, and they're like, if they're Lockean liberals, then they are still Christian in that regard, in that sense, in their liberalism. And so that's why I'm saying that they still practice a form of Protestant religion. And so it's possible that, yeah, Christians hold to radical beliefs, but they still see themselves like as Christian people. And like I was just saying these things to him, and he was like, well, you know, we're like, well, what's Zeus got to do with the Declaration or something? Like, what's Zeus got to do with individual rights? And I'm like, what? You know, it's like I wouldn't understand the question. So I was like, you know, and like, what does Zeus have to do with God's Locke, or I'm sorry, Locke's God, right? Like, what does Zeus, what does Hindu God, Muslim God, a deist God, like what do these gods have to do with the God of Locke? When the God of Locke is the God of the Bible, even his liberalism can be said to be a form of Protestant religion. And so what does that have to do with any of these other gods? Like, I don't have to but defend such an absurd claim of America's God is anyone's God, how that ties into the liberal values of the country. And I said that's like totally dangerous and unnecessary, because obviously, I mean, to me, it's not ambiguous who the God of the Republic is. It's just to these people who lie to themselves and trap themselves in their false consciousness of trying to like secularize the country and de-Christianizing it because of their, like, I don't know, their anti-religious fundamentalism, which is what that is. It's another form of fundamentalism that did not safeguard us from fanatics, sort of just to have these crazy fanatics in your government and in society, all of your institutions, right, struggling with this, or is like some kind of Marxism or Marxism or whatever. And so that's why I kind of have to feel like I have to defend against Christians and non-Christians, right? Understanding how America is Christian and what unites us. Obviously, it would be the liberal values, but in the Christian context, because it is not just individual rights are important to the founders, it's also Christian religion. And but this is what I'm saying, like, when it comes to America being Christian, I mean, I already said how it's Christian, right? This is what I believe I received from God, this understanding. Because it was one of the things that I asked him, like, how is this country Christian? Like, it certainly is Christian, it's just hard to define, but I clearly defined it through the Lockeanism and the dissenting consciousness of dissenting Christians, and how the founders obviously sided with those ideas. And then, yeah, I will just leave it at that. My video's already long. I was just going to try to respond to these Christians and talk about, like, why I don't really support the idea of the Christian Prince. Like, I know some certain nationalists support that idea. Like me, I'm more trying to reach beyond nationalism, trying to go into, like, the consciousness of covenantalism, which does require you to believe in the idea of the American spiritual Israel. You have to believe in that idea, because to me, Israel, the Israel of God, that is. I did have a book, I forgot what it's called. Let me look at it. Messed it up a little. Yeah, this one, the Israel of God and Prophecy, just as Principles of Prophetic Interpretation by Hans K. Larondel. I mean, it kind of, it just says, like, I guess he's against dispensationalism, their understanding of what the Israel God is. This is there's one quote in the back by Dr. Adrel Koenig. It says, quote, "This is the best counter-argument on dispensationalism I have come across. It is a convincing argument both against the dispensationalist position, especially against its hermeneutic. But it is more than that. It is an important contribution to the hermeneutic of eschatological material in Scripture, from which all eschatological tradition can benefit greatly. Presents a well-written, clearly formulated, and well-documented argument." I'm just basically saying that the Israel of God is Jesus, right? And prophecy. Also, like, so it's important that Christian people, right, whether it be a Jew or non-Jew that converts to Jesus, right, they are counted as the faithful Israel because they have believed the word of God, which is Jesus. The other books that sort of hint at the end-time Israel being America would be like this one. You don't have to believe in the idea if you don't want to. This one, America, the Spiritual Israel. I just got this one. I haven't read it all. Just want to know, like, what do these, like, books see? Because I justify it through a simple spirituality. And obviously Jesus being the Adam of God. So to me, the salvation of all Israel is the salvation of all men, because they are talking about the head of both of those things. The head of humanity and the head of the people of God is the same person, Jesus. So to me, I mean, I believe in the salvation of all things. I don't believe in eternal hell. So certainly America is a Christian nation. That ties into its identity. Just want to keep it away from, what is an enemy of God's liberty? That would be Christian authoritarianism, because they have never safeguarded the truth of God. And to me, all they do is taint the name of God, in their pursuit of holiness. And I don't know, this is me. But again, you don't have to agree with me with this. You can just agree or disagree or whatever. But anyway, I'll just stop it there. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.